If you're like me and struggling to process all of the intense feelings that have come up from the election, and you either know and love someone who supports Trump or you're tired of being angry and confused by what's going on in America, then you are in the right place. In this video, I want to share some techniques for processing the wide range of emotions you might be feeling right now in reaction to the 2024 election. I also want to share my personal journey with facing a loved one who supports Trump and finding a way forward that doesn't mean cutting them out of my life. And finally, I want to talk about being an ally and a leader for our communities so that you leave this video empowered to take the next step forward. And if you choose to watch to the end of this video, number one, thank you. And number two, I'm going to ask for your help. So please contribute your voice to the conversation in the comments. If this is the first video of mine you've watched, thank you for being here. I'm Ellen, and I call myself the Contentment Creator because I help creative entrepreneurs gain clarity, courage, contentment, and capacity to do, be, and have all that they want in their lives. This kind of content is not my normal wheelhouse, but so many of my clients and members of my community are going through this same thing. So I wanted to open the conversation here on YouTube. So let's start with the biggest hurdle right now: processing our emotions. Some of us are still experiencing stone cold shock, and that is fully understandable. We didn't see a world where Trump, a convicted felon and a leader responsible for the January 6th insurrection, could possibly be reelected as president, not to mention a leader with a painful lack of regard for women and their safety, people of color, and marginalized groups. I could go on and on why I personally didn't vote for him and why I see you and understand you for feeling the way you do about his election as president. Trust me, I get it. I've been through peaks and valleys of everything from rage to heartbreak to disgust to disappointment to fear to very real grief. I'm in the phase of life where I want to grow my family and become pregnant, and due to my previous pregnancy, I will be high risk the next time I'm pregnant. Women's healthcare is already disturbingly bad and has been for a very long time, but the risks are great for many, many women out there who either willingly or unwillingly become pregnant in the next 4 years and possibly beyond, especially women of color and women in underserved communities and red states. There's legitimacy to our fear, and that instinct to self-protect should be honored. The same goes to people of color, the LGBTQ plus community, and marginalized groups. It is legitimate and understandable that you feel unsafe and vulnerable in a climate under Trump's presidency. So please know that you're not alone and you have people around you who care. Processing emotions can be tricky work. I do this a lot with my clients and in my life because I'm someone who feels a lot. I was a professional singer for 10 years, so I'm used to being around artistic people who feel really deeply and need to let those feelings out or they feel like they're going crazy. The trick with processing emotions is finding and, more importantly, choosing effective and healthy ways to express them so that we don't harm ourselves, others, or our lives. And what I mean by that, other than the obvious that we don't want to cause any physical harm, is that I often joke with my coach and my closest friends that sometimes it feels like there are times in my life where so many things have stacked up and piled on top of me that I just kind of want to burn it all down. I want to lay into someone hard and burn that bridge. I want to quit my responsibilities. I just want to ghost everyone and disappear on an island. And taking those kinds of actions is what I would call unhealthy ways to express emotions. They are the epitome of fight or flight. So in these moments, it's really important to find the space to feel everything in a way that doesn't cause destruction to your life and also help your nervous system understand that it is not in this moment under real life-threatening attack. When we engage our lives from fight, flight, fawn, or freeze responses, our neocortex or the rational thinking brain shuts down. So we're unable to make wise, grounded choices for ourselves. We're behaving like a caged animal. So we need to find ways to vent and feel the feelings that have surfaced for you from this election so that your nervous system can feel safe enough to re-enter rest and digest phase. That's where your body feels safe and secure, and that's how we can start to take steps forward. Until we regulate our emotions, there are no other steps to focus on. So how do we regulate our emotions? In my professional opinion, I think our learning styles and love languages have a lot to do with how we express our feelings. So, for example, I'm a reading/writing learner, and my primary love language is words of affirmation. So I process a lot of my feelings verbally and through writing and journaling. When I'm able to speak through and think through my feelings, I can make sense of them and feel heard by good listeners and get out some of the pent up energy that's driving those emotions. I also find singing songs that channel those feelings helps me a lot because the lyrics and music help me express what I'm feeling but can't always verbalize very clearly. For others, you might be a kinesthetic learner, and your primary love language may be physical touch. For you, most likely, you'll need a lot of physical activity to move through all that energy. You may need to head to a rage room or a batting cage or hit some golf balls or go for a hard run or workout. You may need to stomp or cry it out more viscerally. You may also need extra hugs to open up your heart and feel it all. For still others, you might be an auditory learner and your primary love language might be acts of service. For you, you might need to take some immediate action that makes you feel less helpless and like reach out to a friend and help them process what they're going through so then you can get in touch with your experience and needs. Once you feel like you've helped someone, sometimes that can allow you to help yourself in return. You may also be moved to feel more deeply when you allow someone else to perform an act of service for you if you're having trouble getting through the days or weeks right now. And finally, for those who are visual learners and your primary love language might be gift giving or quality time, you may need to make something like a piece of art or craft or a visual display of your feelings or even write a song. You may want to avoid self isolating by spending extra time with people who love you so that you don't disconnect from yourself and others. You may watch a tearjerker movie or infuriating documentaries that open those floodgates for you to express those feelings of sadness or rage. And maybe you're a mix of several of these types of people and something stood out to you or sparked an idea that resonated. So please take whatever seems right for you and just do it on purpose. Take those actions with the intention of connecting to your heart and let out what's there, channeling that unsettling energy you feel, not feeling alone or numbing, processing your grief and emotions so that your body can remember what safety feels like. And then our next steps become available.
Now, I want to share a very personal story with you in the hopes that I can communicate a few key takeaways that I've gained from successfully not burning this bridge with someone I love who supports Trump. I'll share how I approached it, as well as a few tips for you practicing this approach out in the wild. So, I will say that these conversations were spread across many interactions and nothing was resolved in a day. So, please go into this knowing that Rome wasn't built in a day. And you will most likely not find peace and harmony with the people in your life who support Trump in one conversation, but they layer. So, every time you practice speaking this way, you gain some ground together. Now, out of respect for the people in my life who this story applies to, I'm not going to share who this particular person is to me, but please know they're the kind of person I would never want to lose in my life. Our relationship is 100% not worth losing over this election. But that didn't stop me from really thinking long and hard and questioning if I should end this relationship because of these lack of shared beliefs. So for me, this started when this person approached me and told me they wanted to talk to me about something. And they said they had something they wanted to tell me, but that it may upset me. And they wanted to be honest and transparent and talk through it. The fact that this person did this is a testament to my having worked for years on step one of this video, regulating my emotions. There were chapters in my life where my emotions were so intense and dysregulated and volatile that when someone did or said something that upset me, I would explode or fight them or storm out. My loved ones were scared of me in a way because they knew I'd have a very intense emotional reaction. These behaviors don't mean something's wrong with you or me. They just mean that you feel very deeply and you need to practice over and over again taking those steps to feel your emotions through those healthy containers and actions. Over time, doing what I spoke about earlier and finding those outlets and go to steps to take for letting out our emotions, you start to get more connected to your body so that when feelings come up, you know what you need to do to take care of yourself. So, my first big piece of advice is to remember that to have big conversations and to feel big emotions, you most likely need to separate them as best you can. Trying to do both at once is really not possible, even for the most Gandhi like human. In this case, I was being confronted with my loved one telling me that they know I support Kamala Harris and they understand why, but they would prefer Trump to win, and they presented their reasons why. During that conversation, I tried to ride the waves of my emotions while staying in the conversation. I didn't let the big emotions take precedence because my primary was to the big conversation that was at hand. But that didn't stop them from coming up, of course. So I limited what I shared. I mostly just asked questions. I listened. I left a lot of silence. I shared what I was feeling in ways like I'm feeling my heart race right now and my face feels hot. My stomach is twisted in a knot. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling confused. I'm feeling hurt. But then I left it at that without venting or expressing those feelings in that space at that time. I simply acknowledged the emotions for the sake of honest communication and to honor my own experience, but I kept the primary purpose to hearing the person out. The following days, I took all of those feelings that came up and went to various spaces and various approaches to express them fully. I worked out hard at the gym a couple of times. I took long walks. I journaled, but mostly I talked it through with trusted people who I knew wouldn't judge or vilify this person or their beliefs. I went to people who could stay objective and focused on me and my experience, i.e., people like my therapist, my coach, my colleagues in the coaching world, and I intentionally chose not to go to my friends and family who would side with me against this person because it would only fan the flames and not in a way that would lead to any resolution for me or them. It took hours and hours of conversations before I felt ready and regulated enough to talk to my loved one about this again, well before the election. The first time I brought this conversation up, it was to thank them for being honest and open with me and to acknowledge that these kinds of conversations are how the country is going to move forward and grow from here. So I wanted to celebrate us for even getting this far where we could both be honest about our views with each other and not immediately judge and cut ties. But that didn't negate the strong sense of disagreement that came up and the feelings that this relationship might end because of these differences, or the anger about the impact of this person's beliefs on our country, in my opinion. The first major conversation revealed to me that we receive and understand our news from very different places. But that doesn't necessarily mean that one of us knows the real truth and one of us is subscribed to fake news. This was one area that can derail the entire conversation immediately that we had to tread in lightly. I had to understand and believe that this person received their news from what they deemed credible sources, most of which this person happened to read on X or heard on podcasts. As someone who doesn't really consume traditional news media either, I admitted much of my information comes from YouTube, so we could find common ground in acknowledging that a lot of news filtered through mainstream media is highly biased and paints vastly different pictures of truth. There were some moments of strong judgment from both sides in that conversation, but ultimately, I acknowledged that the only way forward is if we accept the other to be informed to their best ability and that neither of us can be sure to know the whole truth in every subject. And that was as far as we could get in that conversation in a constructive manner. The second conversation I did not approach with much intention because we had done so well communicating so far that I kind of took it for granted. Also, to be really honest, I'd had a strong margarita that night, and I don't normally drink, so the combination of a little less intentionality with my words and a little less filtered by the alcohol, this conversation didn't go well. I was very sensitive to their word choices about the Democrats and Harris as a candidate, and I took what they said personally as an insult to me and my beliefs. And then I responded with judgment to them and their beliefs, and we both ended the conversation angry. This is a perfect example of trying to do two things at once: have a big conversation and process big feelings at the same time. The next morning, I apologized to my loved one for letting my emotions spill over and causing an unproductive conversation to occur, and that clearly I'm angry and hurt and need to work through those feelings before we can speak again more. They apologized too, and we tabled it. Finally, the third major conversation we had was essentially scheduled so that we could both be in the right frame of mind. I told my loved one I needed to speak with them about this again and ask when would be a good time for us to talk about it. They said they needed it to be a couple of days away because they were experiencing some work stress that made for limited mental and emotional bandwidth, which I understand. And I agreed to their timeline since I wanted both of us to have space for this big conversation. When it came to the actual conversation, I expressed to them the things I couldn't reconcile. This person had explained that the reasons they wanted Trump to win were related primarily to the economy and foreign affairs, for example. They agreed with me on many of the social issues and fundamental rights in question for women and marginalized groups, but they expressed that, frankly, those issues did not take priority over the painful cost of inflation on every American. Here are a few conclusions I left that conversation with. Number one, on the surface, by acknowledging we were prioritizing different issues, that initially felt like we had irreconcilable core differences. That felt devastating to acknowledge. So when I shared my fear that I don't know how we could love each other as humans and lack these shared values, we took a step back in the conversation to talk about core values and how they inform our votes. We zoomed way out and shared that we are each voting with the people we love front of mind and with the goal of making the world a better place. But our conclusions for how we would take care of the people we love and make the world a better place landed on different candidates. This loved one saw financial sovereignty as how the average American can feel safer, and I saw physical and psychological sovereignty as how the average American can feel safer. It was important in this point in the conversation to acknowledge that we would continue to disagree on the how of achieving safety and betterness. So there was no convincing the other one to prioritize the issues differently. But we could both provide the benefit of the doubt that we were both looking for the highest good of all. If we didn't come from that generous spirit and give the benefit of the doubt on purpose, the conversation and likely the relationship would have spiraled from there. Number two, after we moved on from naming our intentions for our vote, what was important for me to communicate was that despite the grace I could show for these differing agendas with the same intention, the reality is that women will suffer without adequate and fair health care with regards to abortion rights. So, regardless of my loved one's intention or even their agreement with my stance on abortion, this person's vote would directly cause harm to people. This part of the conversation was very tricky to navigate without becoming highly emotional, so we had to take it very slow. What we grappled with eventually got to was that the heartbreaking truth is how fundamentally flawed and crippling our system of government is. No one should have to choose between physical and financial sovereignty in America. No one should have to choose between women's rights and economic prosperity. No one should have to choose between two candidates who do not fully represent the best interest for all Americans. The system that villainizes and smears candidates and their supporters to gain a vote and divide a nation, rather than putting forth two viable, strong leaders who would both serve the interest of the whole country and unify us all. This loved one doesn't want women to suffer. I don't want women to live paycheck to paycheck to afford their grocery bills. The real world is not black and white, but our system is. In the end, we both shared that I could see myself voting for a black woman if she were running on a Republican platform. And my loved ones said that they could see themselves voting for a populist Democrat like Bernie Sanders, who was transparent about how they would revitalize our country, especially through the economy. And that's as far as we could get before knowing the results of the election. We could both acknowledge our biases and we could find common ground in our core values and we could grieve the broken system that perpetuates inequality. While we could not agree, we could respect one another. And then the election results came in. I told my loved one that while I'm sure they are pleased and even relieved at that outcome, I needed them to empathize with my experience and give me space. So I vented and grieved with my like minded friends and family. I spoke to my therapist and coach. I checked in with clients in my community. I spent hours and hours verbally processing my emotions and grief. Eventually, after the anger was spent and I was left with the hollowness of disappointment and the rawness of grief, I reached out to a spiritual role model of mine. We spoke in depth about acceptance and coming from love, even in the most challenging of times. We discussed leaning on faith to trust that all is unfolding as it should. We addressed the intolerance, hatred, and judgment that welled up within me for all of Trump's supporters and examined their roots within me. We talked about how accepting and loving others who walk different paths doesn't betray me and my path. We talked about how to be a source of peace in the world when it most needs it. From that place, I was finally ready to speak to my loved one. I shared about my rage and judgment and heartbreak I'd experienced. I shared about my personal triggers that had gotten activated, and I shared about the conversation with my spiritual leader. My loved one listened, validated, and gave me hugs throughout that conversation, and we've reached a harmonious place in our relationship again for now. We have grown together through this experience, and we are both proud of and grateful for each other for the journey we walked and continue to walk every day as we walk into and through Trump's presidency. I share all of these intimate details so that you can hear what's possible for yourself, but also know that each step may not have gone the way it went if the other person were not also doing their work. If you take this as inspiration to go out into the wild of your own life to engage in these conversations, please remember, above all else, that big conversations and big emotions need to be separated. If someone you are engaging in a conversation with starts experiencing big emotions and lashes out or demonstrates disrespectful behavior or rhetoric, then discourse must come to a standstill until clearer boundaries are set and the messiness is cleaned up with genuine apologies. The path forward is not to convince anyone of anything or to vent our emotions at each other, but to find common ground, to exercise compassion and empathy, and to grow together in our shared community.
Who said it's true that the growing only happens on your own? They don't know me and you.
And finally, let's talk about how we're going to make America whole again with our own leadership and allyship in our local communities. This is the section I'll need your help on because I am no expert and I imagine this will vary greatly based on where you live. So I'd love for your ideas and contributions in the comments. Obviously, this wasn't the result I wanted for this election, but what I've elected to make that mean is that I will double my efforts to donate my time and resources to causes and organizations that support women and marginalized folks, to local leaders who stand for what I believe in, and to continue expanding my reach in these difficult conversations so that more bonds are made than broken. I will walk through these next 4 years remembering our world is not black and white. I will remember that Trump is not Hitler and Trump supporters are not Nazis. The majority of Americans simply want better for us all. I will remember that we live in a world full of paradoxes with simultaneously conflicting truths. So I have the capacity to embrace disagreement and harmony with my loved ones and neighbors. I will remember that local and state governments possess a great deal of power, and I have personal power to do good. And I ask of you to share in the comments what you will remember and take with you, as well as what organizations you recommend for uplifting the voices and causes that we most care about that may be neglected by this next president, but won't be left behind by our people.
And grow
Thank you for
as
watching.
we go.